Hello, good afternoon. It's a Ukrainian talk show. My name is Sasha Star, and my guest today is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here.
Great to have you as always. So the still some kind of some people believe it's a stalemate, but every day Russia is losing thousand people. It's already over 400,000 people
Yeah,
that are lost. Can you
it's
mention that
correct.
number?
See,
400,000. It's I even don't know what to compare it to. It's incredible number. If 10 years,
well, it's below the numbers of World War II, which is
yeah,
obviously a big gap to fill, but
mm,
it's certainly greater than any other conflict that Russia has been involved with in the 21st century. Certainly,
yeah.
it's the largest number of casualties for them there, and it is the largest number of casualties that Russia has experienced in any period of its history going back to the beginning of the Cold War. So only the Second World War would exceed the number of casualties that Russia has sustained thus far.
Now I mentioned that actually the Second World War for Russia started, they claim, in June of 1941. So it was only 4 years, Great Russian War, or they call it Great Patriotic War. Now, but this war is already 2 years old, so it's already half the distance where Russia was fighting Germany, one of the superior armies of all the time, and here they're fighting Ukraine, which virtually had no army a few years
Which
ago.
tells you which tells you actually that the quality of the Russian soldier compared with the Second World War is in fact lower.
Yeah,
Lower today in the 21st century than it was during the Second World War. During the Second World War, of course, you have a much greater degree of patriotic fervor supporting the Russian cause than you have now. So there is that, and plus the fact that because they had not really been tested in combat since Afghanistan. They're involved in Afghanistan, which ended in 1989. So that's you have a very inexperienced military, which has already lost the best quality soldiers that they had up to this point, and now they're going through their second tier and third tier level of personnel before they, in desperation, would have to start turning to the actual Russian people themselves, the core people, ones in Moscow and and at that point they're in real trouble. They're in trouble now. The degree of trouble is increasing as the days go by, and Ukraine is continuing to exceed expectations from my perspective. They are incorporating new weapons. They are inventing new techniques.
yep.
They are building their own defense industry. They are doing things that we never expected them to be able to do. And this has been overlooked for the most part by the Western experts. And you have all these retired generals and so forth saying, oh, Ukraine is in trouble. They'll have to sue for peace, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, right. I don't believe it. I just I look at the massive number of casualties. What are they going to do? Bury the Ukrainians in their own corpses? Sheesh.
What's interesting is that Russia is trying to portray itself also as a great naval power, and they have so many fleet, submarines, and all that. And Ukraine, which has apparently no uh, any fleet in the Black Sea, they
But they have
are very successful to destroying Russian.
they
Uh,
have the Ukrainians have a very successful sea denial strategy. They are successfully countering the sea presence that Russia has, confined it as it is to the Black Sea. The Russians don't really have anywhere to run. They really can't. They just made themselves a big target, a nice shooting gallery for the Ukrainians. And so the Ukrainians have been able to practice a sea denial strategy to such an extent that they are now able to, they're apparently, according to reports, able to export again and keep the Russians from interfering with that, which is very key. So right now, the real drama, as you've no doubt noticed in over the last 2 days, has been this drama about Russia planning to deploy a nuclear weapon in space. Oh my goodness! That on the surface, if you look at it in isolation, gee, that sounds like a real threat. But when you look at it within the context of history, no. Believe it or not, the first mention where the public was made aware of the possibility or problem of nuclear weapons in space by any country was, believe it or not, on a 1968 episode of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
An episode called Assignment Earth aired in 1968, and it had the Enterprise traveling back in time to observe what was supposed to be a launch by the United States in 1968 of what was then called a FOBS, Fractional Orbital Bombardment System. They were going to put multiple nuclear weapons on this Saturn rocket and put it into orbit. And the Enterprise was observing how in the world did they get through this problem without totally obliterating themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, there was long story short, a planted agent from basically a faraway galaxy managed to help, with the aid of the Enterprise, managed to sabotage that entire thing. And in the end of the episode, they detonated the nuclear weapons 104 miles above Earth, which supposedly averting a nuclear world war, but they completely overlooked the problem of electromagnetic pulse. Now, here they're talking about the Russians being ready to deploy a nuclear weapon in space, which, if detonated, the real threat is lots of electromagnetic pulse, which could disrupt or destroy the global space infrastructure of satellites. Well, the problem with that is Russia's not the only country that could do that. China could do that. Even North Korea, any country that has a nuclear weapon or warhead, and they put it on a missile and get it up even to a suborbital path, would be capable of threatening the global space infrastructure by threatening to detonate that weapon in space. We learned that from the 1962 Starfish Prime test, that when we detonated a hydrogen bomb 400 kilometers above Earth, and that produced one heck of an electromagnetic pulse. And we learned about the dangers of that. So I think that much of this is, on the one hand, currently overblown. Yes, Russia could do that. Yes, but so could other nations. They haven't done it. The other thing that my research and that history suggests is that the solution to this threat is for us to be able to replace our satellite constellation with something which is much more durable. Now, I've spoken about that on this program before. If we upgrade the Space Force with a space fleet that is capable of operating in low Earth orbit, you can take the equipment that we currently put on satellites to conduct surveillance of Earth, and you put them on the starships. Now, the advantage of that is if Russia or China were to destroy a U.S. satellite in orbit, yeah, it would be bad, but satellites, as someone once observed, satellites do not have mothers. If you have Russia or China attacking a U.S. Space Force starship in low Earth orbit that is conducting surveillance as a satellite would, that is a clear act of war because you have personnel involved.
Absolutely.
So the solution here is to, in my perspective, is to gradually replace our satellite infrastructure with supplemented and backed up by starships in orbit that could perform multiple missions, not just surveillance, but it could also be the centerpiece of a global ballistic missile defense system. That fleet could clean up space junk. Just clean the debris out of Earth orbit with using Space Force personnel. There are multiple things, and believe it or not, it could also, even though I don't think it's really needed, a space fleet in orbit could monitor and evaluate climate change using actual data rather than computer models. You know, the anthropogenic climate change personnel are all saying, "Oh, the temperature is going to be out of control. It's global warming, climate change." A space fleet in Earth orbit could constantly monitor that process with real data, and it would, in the process, disprove the boogeyman of anthropogenic climate change. It would prove that this is a natural process, well under control, and not likely to go out of control anytime within the next few centuries.
Absolutely. Still, there's very uncertain situation while Russia is talking about the nuclear weapons used in space and all that fantastic stuff. In the meantime, they are still trying to take over Avdiivka for several months now. About that,
It's starting to remind me. It's starting to remind me of that old joke about, you know, the Russians working on developing a nuclear suitcase, what nuclear weapon in a suitcase. Yeah, they have no problem with a nuclear weapon. They're still trying to develop the suitcase.
absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely. And what's happened is that there are a lot of political news happening. Zelensky is now on the European conference, and Putin is being further ostracized, especially with the death of his critic Alexei Navalny. And there is very little doubts in anybody's mind who is behind that situation. And I think it's too bad if Tucker Carlson would take interview with Putin a few days later. He would definitely
Yeah, bad timing.
yeah, yeah,
Bad timing.
So this is it's an incredible scenario where Putin said to Tucker Carlson that he wants to get a peace agreement with Ukraine. Tucker didn't ask him on what conditions and what's required and what he's offering as a peace for Ukraine. And I really think that Russia is getting a little bit overextended with this war, especially this number, absolutely horrifying, 400,000 killed, and more is coming because they're bringing more and more people there who have no idea what is a war. And surprisingly, this is a real continental war where Russians are supposed to be so strong. I mean, they're criticizing so-called, according to Dugin, the sea powers, United States and England and others, and they cannot really fight continental war. They're just going to shores and they're taking control over the shores of all these countries like Australia and India and others, so on, making them colonies. And but real continental war like Russia fights or Germany, they cannot do that. Well, Russia shows how it can fight continental war against Ukraine.
Russia, the experience of Russia in this war may actually refute Mackinder's theory, Mackinder's heartland theory.
Mhm.
Yeah, he says that, well, who controls the heartland, controls the world. Well, Russia can't even control the heartland.
Actually, Dugin is one of the disciples of Mackinder. He's following him.
Well, Dugin must be having some sleepless nights. That's all I can say.
I think he's not alone. I think the Professor Mearsheimer, I think he has sleepless night because according to his real politics theories, Russia had to quash Ukraine in a day, maybe a month, maybe several months. Well, now it's almost 2 years. It cannot get anywhere.
I believe Mearsheimer was at one point was actually advocating that he wasn't worried about nuclear proliferation because nuclear proliferation would simply increase deterrence. In that view, if every nation had a nuclear weapon, everyone would be maximally deterred from attacking each other because of a fear of escalation. Well, that's not exactly a sound remedy to the problem of nuclear weapons. He was operating under the strategic orthodoxy that there was no real defense against nuclear weapons, and at the time he was right when he first advanced that theory. But I believe he has allowed himself to be lulled by the strategic orthodoxy that has dominated Western strategic thinking since the 1960s, that being the doctrine of mutually assured destruction.
Yep.
That doctrine implicitly assumes that there is no possible defense against nuclear weapons, that the technology, the offense, will always be able to overcome the defense, and that therefore deterrence, because of the fear of escalation, is the only real course. However, they are overlooking the development, the increasing improvement of ballistic missile defense technology, which has been demonstrated in the Ukraine war. They also overlook the increasing development of various types of lasers and the development, as I pointed out, of reusable spacecraft, thanks to Mr. Elon Musk, from which we could construct rapidly a space fleet and do that, all the other things that I talk about, creating a system, a ring of interlocking shields, if you will, that would essentially render nuclear weapons, in the words of the late President Ronald Reagan, impotent and obsolete. So the real open secret right now is that this is all possible with the proper leadership and direction to make it happen.
Jonathan, but you know what he's missing? He's missing very important details, is a resolve to use nuclear weapons.
Right.
And without that, your nuclear weapons are useless.
Yep.
To resolve and actually use them, that elevates all the perspective of the war with
right. And the thing is, Clausewitz in his model of total war, if you looked at it from a Clausewitzian point of view, the only political objective is always what should dominate the use of military force in war. So therefore, the only political objective that would justify the use of nuclear weapons against an opponent would be the political objective of achieving a Carthaginian peace, the elimination of the opponent as a viable political entity. That is the most extreme form of political objective, one which we have not seen really since the Punic Wars, Rome versus Carthage. So now you have, with no opponent apparently willing to be able to go to that extreme, the logical course of action for the United States and the West is to pursue an asymmetric response to Russia's nuclear strategy based upon ballistic missile defense, with the aim of neutralizing and making Russia's weapons impotent and obsolete. Once that occurs, not only does Russia become irrelevant, but also China, also Iran, and North Korea, at one stroke, neutralizing the political leverage that all of these nations have been trying to gain through their attainment of nuclear weapons delivery systems.
But because no one of these countries has resolved to use nuclear weapons, their so-called or perceived advantage of having these weapons, except Iran, that on its way, but it still doesn't have it yet. It's really more of a poker game, basically the intimidation game of some kind, and even that doesn't work very well, because at the beginning of the war, Putin mentioned a couple of times that they may use nuclear weapons, and the West was very taken aback by these insinuations. However, when he started to say it, and his ministers like Lavrov and some others, and they were started to say that almost several times a week, they basically deteriorated.
The threat loses its potency the more they repeat it.
Absolutely. So nobody pays any attention anymore to all these insinuations.
Very similar to the boy who cried wolf.
Absolutely.
Raising the alarm, and eventually they become anesthetized to it.
And you are absolutely right. According to Clausewitz, that the war is continuation of politics by other means. So if Russia would use still nuclear weapons, even tactical, what are they achieving? They want to control Ukraine. So you want to control Ukraine after the nuclear explosions. It's not viable strategy, and you're saying Putin saying that we are all same people, we are brothers, Ukrainian and Russians. So you're using nuclear weapons against your brothers? How does that works?
It also reminds me, it harkens back to when in 1990, when East Germany collapsed,
Yeah.
and the West Germans went into the East German military bases, and they discovered the Warsaw Pact's war plans. And Lothar Ruhl, a German journalist, wrote an article about the war plans that they discovered, and discovered that the Warsaw Pact, up until through 1989, was planning, in the event of war with NATO, to use up to 300 nuclear weapons against NATO targets, with the aim literally of essentially blasting a hole through NATO's lines in the North German plain and then driving straight for the Channel coast.
But Jonathan,
Yeah.
wait a second. At that time, most of the time during the Soviet Union, Russians had a huge advantage in tanks and air force. And so why did they need to use nuclear weapons if they could overrun Western Europe in a matter of few days?
Well, probably because the Russians did not have that much confidence in their own logistical capabilities and conventional warfare capabilities. The idea, according to Soviet military theory at that time, that they used examples from World War II, which suggested that the higher the density of artillery fire over a shorter period of time, they claim that led to greater rates of advance for their forces. The implication of that being, since nuclear weapons represented the highest density of firepower over the shortest period of time, if they were to use nuclear weapons, this would generate the highest rates of advance for their conventional forces. It's literally blast a hole in the enemy's lines and then drive through the gap.
But their conventional forces would have to operate on a radiation zone, and
That's the big problem. Yeah, they would have to drive through that contaminated zone. They would have to resupply their troops eventually, and that's where they would be vulnerable. Fortunately at that time, of course, the United States and its NATO allies, they had nuclear weapons which combined outnumbered the Soviet forces, nuclear forces still. But the real catalyst was the Reagan's declaration of the Strategic Defense Initiative, which to the Russians absolutely terrified them, because they saw in that, according to the book KGB: The Inside Story by Christopher Andrew and Oleg Gordievsky, the use of the KGB report that was sent to Gorbachev in April of 1985 stated that the SDI program would eventually be able to block 90% of Soviet missiles in a first strike, and there was no way that the Soviet Union could keep up with this capability. Now, do you believe that we would actually have that capability at that time?
at that time,
No. But it didn't matter. The Russians believed it. They acted on that belief, and they spent themselves into bankruptcy trying to counter a phantom SDI program.
I think Russia would be better off if Brezhnev would live a few years longer. Because if Brezhnev would look at this the Star Wars scenario, he wouldn't be able to understand what it is, and he would tell his space advisors, you know what, don't tell me all this garbage, just go and have some vodka and go to sleep.
Or something, pretty much. Yeah, but President Reagan was getting frustrated in the early 1980s as Soviet leaders kept dying on him. First, he was getting frustrated that they keep dying on me. First it's Brezhnev, then it's Andropov, then it's Chernenko, then finally he gets one that had some shelf life left on him.
At that time, when somebody important figure like Brezhnev would die, on Russian television they would play music from Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky. And so when Brezhnev died, there was Swan Lake music. A few months later, another one, again Swan Lake. So when Chernenko passed away, and there's again Swan, I was watching, I couldn't believe again. Now, yes, Swan Lake music, Tchaikovsky, our Tavarish Chernenko just passed away. So I mean, you shouldn't laugh, of course, because it's a human tragedy, the death of Tavarish Chernenko and others. But that's what was happening in the 80s. And Tsolgov and Gorbachev came, well, relatively young. And
Yeah, they said they're all breathing a sigh of relief. Says at least we won't have to listen to Swan Lake for quite some time.
yeah, you're missing Swan Lake now. I'm pretty sure.
Where's Swan Lake when we need it?
Yeah. Now we would love to listen to Swan Lake. Listen, hopefully, I'm watching my diet and do exercises. I really hope to get to the day of Swan Lake. I love this music. It's really great. Tchaikovsky. Da, 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 da. That would be great to hear it one more time. With that, I would like to remind you that, okay, I wanted, of course, to touch it with Ivan. Hopefully, Tuesday, maybe we'll be able to do
Yeah,
it with
I think
this.
yeah he hasn't been feeling too well lately, but I think and I suspect that if he had tried to come on the program today, his his speaking endurance would have been limited.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure about it. Well, the next program on Tuesday, I will be in the island of Aruba.
Ooh.
Yeah, so
Are we taking a vacation? Or are you simply changing your mode of transmission? You're going to be transmitting from Aruba?
Well, it's vacation, and I will be transmitting from Aruba. I will be there for 2 weeks. It's our first trip in 4 years because
Oh,
of the COVID.
excellent.
And then my wife had this accident, and now she feels better, so we will be able to entertain some holiday, and I'm looking forward to it, of course. But we'll broadcast as usual. Maybe my surroundings will be
Yeah,
different.
your surroundings will definitely be more colorful.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yes. So we'll do that. And so in the meantime, John, I would like to thank you very much for today's program. And we'll see you again on Tuesday, same place, same time. And have a great weekend.
You
And
do the same.
Slava Ukraini. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye bye.